Hello everyone and welcome to a new video dedicated to our beloved Snoopy and the world of Peanuts. The December 22nd, 1950 strip exemplifies Charles Schulz's subtle, everyday humor in the Peanuts from the very beginning. With an essential but incisive visual narrative, he recounts a scene familiar to anyone with a dog, inexplicable and at times infuriating behavior. In 4 vignettes, Schulz guides the reader from initial puzzlement to Charlie Brown's growing frustration, culminating in an irony-laden punchline. Snoopy is still at an early stage of his development. Devoid of future sophistication, his behavior is purely instinctive, without complex thought. However, a distinctive trait already emerges: the ability to communicate without words, relying only on body language. The strip also highlights the patience or lack thereof of Charlie Brown, who here is more of a passive observer than a loving friend to Snoopy. This type of interaction, based on human frustration in the face of canine indifference, will become a recurring theme in Peanuts. Graphic minimalism is another key element. The entire scene takes place in an armchair, without elaborate backgrounds, focusing attention on the characters' reactions. The use of graphic symbols, a question mark and an exclamation point above Charlie Brown, simply and effectively underscores the changing moods of the main characters. Finally, Schulz demonstrates his talent in the construction of the visual gag. The action tells the story without the need for dialogue until the last vignette. This balance between images and words is one of the features that make Peanuts a timeless masterpiece. In the first vignette, we see Snoopy running from left to right in front of Charlie Brown, who is sitting with a paper in his hand. The image immediately captures the contrast between the two characters, with Snoopy appearing to be overwhelmed by an uncontrollable energy and Charlie Brown standing in a static, seemingly indifferent position. A question mark appears above Charlie's head, a visual detail that suggests how he has no clear idea why Snoopy is jumping, almost as if he is driven by a sudden or random impulse with no clear direction. Charlie Brown's facial expression, while remaining neutral, carries with it a subtle tinge of puzzlement and curiosity, as if he is trying to figure out what is going on, but failing to do so. This creates an interesting dynamic, in which Snoopy's frenzy collides with Charlie Brown's calm and stillness, establishing from the outset a unique rhythm for the strip. The contrast between movement and stillness is not only visual, but also emotional, laying the groundwork for the tone that will develop in later vignettes, in which Snoopy's behavior might reveal itself further, while Charlie Brown's stillness might remain constant, as if he were the only still point in a world full of chaos and unpredictability. In the second vignette, the situation is repeated, but with a reversal in the direction of movement. Snoopy now jumps from right to left. The Charlie Brown stance remains unchanged, with the same question mark above his head, a symbol of uncertainty and confusion. Charlie Brown, however, maintains the same position as in the previous vignette, which creates a feeling of continuity and stasis in his behavior. This repetition of the movement, but with the opposite direction, not only lends rhythm to the scene, but also plays with predictability, generating a comic effect that emerges precisely from the reader's awareness that something will be repeated, but with a small variation. The predictability of Snoopy's movement, which continues without stopping, helps to make the escalation more and more interesting and engaging. Schulz succeeds in this way in building the tension gradually, without forcing the action too much, but preparing the reader for what will be Charlie Brown's final reaction, which will explode in a way that is all the more powerful the more the pace of the situation has been well dosed. In the third vignette, the change becomes really obvious. Snoopy continues to run, but something in Charlie Brown's expression immediately catches the eye. His face is now visibly irritated. He is no longer the confused boy he used to be, but a character who is beginning to feel palpable frustration. At this point, an exclamation mark appears above his head, which is not just a graphic element, but a true representation of his emotional state. This simple sign has never been used more effectively. The exclamation mark amplifies his interchange from surprise to frustration, creating an immediate connection with the reader. Charles Schulz's genius lies precisely in this. With such a minimal gesture, he manages to make us feel all of Charlie Brown's inner turmoil without the need for words, making impeccable use of visual language. This graphic sign not only marks the emotional transition, but also highlights the dynamic between the protagonist and his dog, where, for once, Charlie Brown is no longer indifferent or distracted, but is confronted with a situation that challenges him. In the last vignette, the gag reaches its climax with a dynamic that perfectly expresses the essence of Peanuts' humor. Snoopy, finally coming to a halt, sits quietly in front of Charlie Brown, sporting a totally innocent and unconcerned expression, while the latter, visibly exasperated, can no longer contain his discontent. With a burst of frustration, Charlie Brown exclaims, "You can't possibly realize how annoying that is." The contrast between Charlie Brown's great irritation and Snoopy's total indifference creates a comic situation that is hilarious precisely because it demonstrates the dog's inability to understand the emotions of his human companion. This scene highlights a typical aspect of the Peanuts dynamics, the human character's exaggerated reactions to trivial situations, amplified by Snoopy's distracted and disinterested behavior. The reader, who easily identifies with Charlie Brown's frustration, finds himself laughing not only at the joke, but at Snoopy's utter incomprehension, escalating the comic effect to a climax. The punchline, then, is not just an observation about the dog's behavior, but becomes a moment of universal outburst against small but infuriating, everyday difficulties. In conclusion, this cartoon beautifully exemplifies the comic force Charles Schulz has been able to instill in the Peanuts. The scene unfolds with seeming levity, but it is actually constructed with great skill. The contrast between Charlie Brown's exasperation and Snoopy's utter indifference not only generates immediate laughter, but also reveals one of the key elements of Schulz's humor, the simplicity of everyday situations that become extraordinary through the character's reactions. Charlie Brown's punchline is not just a moment of venting, but an ironic reflection on the frustration we all, to some extent, feel when we feel misunderstood or when life's small difficulties seem unbearable. The contrast between his exasperation and Snoopy's serenity also invites reflection on how, often, we fret needlessly about things that, after all, have no real impact. Thus, through Snoopy's innocence and Charlie Brown's frustration, Schulz reminds us that comedy can arise from the most mundane situations, and that even in moments of great irritation there is always room for a laugh. It is a unique skill that allows Peanuts to remain, to this day, one of the most beloved and universal strips ever.
If you enjoyed yourselves, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and activate the little bell to stay updated, and see you next friends.